Hello everyone, this is Rohan Mishram and welcome to my lecture on prediction of RNA secondary structures. So before we jump into RNA secondary structures and what are the methods that are available for predicting the RNA's secondary structures, well, let us just have a brief recap of as to what we have done in our previous sessions. Okay, so this is what we have learned so far about RNA structures, that these RNAs has got enormous structural and functional diversities. They have got roles in each and every aspect of cellular physiology. That means they are involved in the process of translation, they are involved in process of transcription, they are involved in process of RNA splicing, RNA processing and editing. They are also involved in cellular localization. They also perform the function of catalysis, right? So this means that these RNA has got a very important role that they need to play to maintain structural integrity and to maintain functionality for a given cell. Okay, so these RNA sequences, now we know that these RNA sequences folds and the base pairs to form the secondary structure. Okay, so RNA secondary structure formation is mediated via monovalent cations like K plus ions. There are various type of tertiary structure and these tertiary structures of RNA are associated with specific functions. So we know that RNA exists at tertiary structural level, and there are a lot of tertiary structures that we know so far. Like we know there RNA folds into tertiary structure called as pseudonodes. They fold into tertiary structure called as tetra loop receptor motif. They form RNA kissing loop. They form RNA, you can say ribose zipper, and each of these RNA tertiary structure has got some specific functions to play in cells. Okay, we have also learned about some popular forms of representing the RNA secondary structure. Like we have discussed what is string representation and what is string and bracketed representation. We have discussed what is circle plot, what is secondary structure graph, what are mountain plots, and what are dot plots. So today we would talk in more details of these dot plots as a method for predicting the RNA secondary structures. Okay, so we also know that there is certain thermodynamics and energetics that is involved in RNA structure when it comes to folding. We have learned that there are certain factors that affect the stability of RNA structure, and these factors being the hydrogen bonding between base pairs is one of the major factor that affects the stability of RNA structure. And based on this factor, there was a model that was proposed, what we call it as the nearest neighbor method. And according to this nearest neighbor method, whatever free energy calculations were done, that were based on the basis that can potentially interact with one another. Okay, so this nearest neighbor method was based on how bases can potentially interact with one another. There is another component in your RNA structure that affects its stability, what we call it as stacking of neighboring base pairs. And the Turner's method is based on this stacking of neighboring base pairs. Okay, so whatever free energy calculations that were performed in this Turner's method were based on stacking of base pairs. Okay, so you can read this paper that was published in PNAS for more details of this Turner's method and what is its contribution in RNA in stabilizing the RNA structure as such. Okay, So now let us come to the topic. Okay, this was just a recap. Let us come to the topic, to the main point. That is what we are going to discuss in our next few hours, is that how can we predict the structure of RNA? What are the different methods that are available for predicting the structure of RNA? We would be focusing on predicting only the secondary structure of RNA. Okay, so very two simple and efficient methods that are available for such secondary structure prediction of RNA are these dot plots. Okay, we can use those dot plots as I have mentioned for predicting the secondary structure. And another method that we have is called as base pair maximization, which implements dynamic programming for finding out the secondary structure of a given RNA sequence. So these are the two methods that we are going to discuss in our lectures. Okay, so well, let us first begin with the simple one, what we call it as the dot plot method for predicting the RNA secondary structure. So uh, before we discuss as to how this dot plot method is used for RNA secondary structure prediction, it would be better if I first tell you what exactly is this dot plot, and let us have some brief background of this dot plot, and then we would think of how we can implement it in our RNA secondary structure prediction. So yes, so here is the chronology, or you can say the order in which the RNA structure prediction methods have evolved. Okay, so the very first and pioneering work was done by Nussinov and Jacobson, and their paper was published back in 1980s in PNAS. Okay, later on in 1981, Zucker and Stigler proposed their own RNA secondary structure prediction method. In the subsequent year, 1983, Trifonov and Boloshi published their own algorithms, and the list still continues now till, I mean, M-fold is the latest addition to the RNA secondary structure prediction methods. Okay, we will talk about this M-fold in our practical sessions. Okay, so to begin with, let us start discussing with the simpler ones. Okay, well, let us first talk about what exactly is this dot matrix analysis. Okay, so basically, this dot matrix analysis was proposed in 1970 by A.J. Gibbs and J. McIntyre. Okay, and these two propose this dot matrix analysis as a new method for comparing two amino acid and nucleotide sequences. Okay, the objective was to compare amino acid or nucleotide sequences. Okay, and in their method, what these guys did is that they represented a graph that was drawn with one sequence written across the page and other sequence written on the left hand side. Okay, so whatever contact matrix that will be generated in such a way, and in such contact matrix, so wherever the same letter appeared in both the sequences, a dot was placed as shown over here. Okay, and this dot was placed at the intersection, at the position where the same letter appeared. Okay, so in this way, you would end up with a lot of dots in your contact matrix. This is something called as contact matrix. And next, what it was needed to be done is that we were supposed to find out if the dot exists in diagonals. Okay, so whatever dots were produced in such a way, such a resulting graph was then scanned for a series of dots that forms a diagonal. Okay, and this diagonal eventually revealed the similarity between the two sequences. Okay, so this is the basic concept of dot matrix analysis when it comes to comparing the two sequences, and these two sequences can be either protein sequences, they can be nucleotide sequences, as in this case you can see. So we can extend this concept of dot matrix analysis for predicting the secondary structure of RNA. So what here we need to do is that in case of RNA structure prediction, we shall be looking for base pairing rather than similarity. So in our case of secondary structure prediction, we can modify this method. Okay, so we can modify this method and place a dot wherever there is base pairing. Now in this case we have placed a dot wherever there is similarity or identity, but we can implement the same concept for our RNA secondary structure, and in that case wherever there is possibility of base pairing, we would place a dot at that intersection and then scan for diagonals that would indicate the base pairing. Over here the similarity is shown with this particular diagonal. Okay, this dot represent alignment of C with C, this dot represent alignment of T with T, and this dot, subsequent dot in the diagonal, represent alignment of A with A. Then this dot in the diagonal represent alignment of G with G. Next dot represent alignment of G with G, and hence we say that this much region from sequence 1 is similar to this much region from sequence 2 based on how do we uh, interpret the diagonals that are shown in your dot plot. Okay, so we can implement the same concept for predicting the secondary structure of RNA. Only the difference would be that instead of placing a dot at similarity, we would place a dot wherever there is possibility of formation of base pair, and then find out how many such base pairing forms a diagonal, and that diagonal would eventually represent the secondary structure of RNA. Okay, so this is the simple concept, and now there are pros and cons of using this simple concept. Okay, so let us talk about what is the advantage of such dot matrix method for RNA secondary structure prediction. Well, the biggest asset of such dot matrix analysis is that it would allow you to visualize the entire comparison at once. Okay, and you would not be concentrating on any one optimal region, but rather this concept, this dot matrix analysis would give you the gestalt of the whole thing. Okay, like what is happening all over the two all over the sequences, RNA sequence as such. Okay, but the disadvantage is, although this method would reveal all possible pairing between the pairing in base pairing in that RNA structure, but somehow it is unable to identify of the multiple possible base pairing which one is the optimal secondary structure. That is one of the biggest advantage. Okay, and to deal with this, later on in 1980s or so, another method implementing dynamic programming algorithm were proposed, and one of the very popular dynamic programming method is in form of this base pair maximization. Okay, so what we do in this base pair maximization method is that we tend to find a structure which has got maximum amount of base pairing. Okay, and it is an efficient dynamic programming approach that was implemented by Nussinov and Jacobson. Okay, so what this base pair maximization method do is that it compares the sequence against itself in a dynamic programming matrix. Okay, so what is done is that whatever sequence we have, well, say for example, if this is the RNA sequence that you need to find out its secondary structure, we use the same sequence in the two dimensions. Okay, and we compare the same sequence on itself, okay, in a dynamic programming matrix. Okay, so this base pair maximization method has got 4 rules for scoring a structure at a given point in your dynamic programming S matrix. Okay, so now since the structure folds upon itself, well, say for example, if this is your RNA sequence, when it folds, it this much portion would, when it folds, then this much portion would fold upon itself. The thing would be, it would fold upon itself. Okay, and therefore whatever your resulting S matrix, or whatever will be your resulting dynamic programming matrix, you don't have to fill out entire matrix as such. You would have to focus only on the half of it. Why? Because uh, the structure would fold upon itself. Okay, so this is the reason why we have to solve only the half of the scoring matrix in your RNA structure. While in your sequence alignment, as in case of your Needleman and Wunsch algorithm and Smith and Waterman algorithm, we used to compare the two sequences. This used to be sequence 1 and sequence 2 usually used to be some different sequence. Therefore, it was necessary to fill up an entire matrix, transformation matrix, to be very precise. Okay, but in case of RNA secondary structure, since our RNA sequence would fold upon itself, it would be sufficient that we compute the values in half of the matrix only. Okay, so this is a kind of advantage that would save your computational cost as well as the time. Okay, when you try to create secondary structure from the primary structure of the given RNA sequence using this dynamic programming implementation method like base pair maximization. Okay, so let us move on. There are some popular dynamic programming approaches that are described. Okay, so the very first one that was proposed was from Nusinov's group, and the very popular method that came into existence or that came into use was the base pair maximization method that Nusinov and Jacobson proposed in 1980. But before this paper, they also, this Nusinov's group has uh, you know uh, has published one more algorithm, and that was quite elementary. That was published in 1978. Okay, so just remember that this Nusinov has published 2 papers on RNA secondary structure prediction. We will come to this in a while. Okay, then in 1981, energy dot plot method was proposed by Zucker and Stigler, followed by this Trifonov and Boloshi's method in 1983. Okay, so for your references, I am providing the citations of all these papers that we have just talked about. You can download these papers from PubMed or any other sources and read it out so that you might get used to this concept. Okay, so let us now talk about this base pair maximization approach using dynamic programming method. Okay, so the algorithm for RNA secondary structure prediction, it involves 3 steps. What we call it as the first step is initialization. Once we initialize the protocol, we need to generate and create this S matrix, and once we end up populating the entire S matrix, we need to perform this backtracing. Okay, this backtracing is also called as traceback of the S matrix. Okay, so these are the simple 3 steps that we need to do, or there are 3. This algorithm is a 3-way algorithm. It entails aspect like initialization, creation and population of the S matrix, and traceback of the so created S matrix. Okay, so let us talk about these mentioned steps in more details. Okay, so this is what the flow chart is going to be that we are going to work. The very first step that we need to do is that we need to obtain the RNA sequence. You can obtain it from any nucleotide sequence database. Okay, once you obtain the RNA sequence, what you are supposed to do is that you need to create a scoring matrix, and after creating a scoring matrix you need to place the sequences, place the sequence on, across the scoring matrix. I will show you how these things are done. Once you are once you finish up with this step, next thing is that you need to initiate, and you initiate this S matrix by setting the diagonal values to 0. Why do we do that? We would talk about it in talk about it in our subsequent time. Okay, so once you set the diagonals, all the values in the diagonals to 0. Okay, additionally what you do is that you identify the previous diagonal and also set their values to 0. Okay, so once you are done with it, next step is to devise a scoring scheme that would consist of 4 values. Therefore, for populating each and every box in your S matrix, you would have to compute at least 4 values. Okay, so this is what is going to happen in a loop now. You would set each matrix position by calculating the 4 values. Okay, after doing that, whatever 4 values that you have computed, you will find out which one is the maximum of those 4 values. Okay, and whatever the maximum value is, you would put that in your final scoring position. Okay, after doing this, you would ask yourself a question that have you populated the each and every box that is present in your S matrix. Okay, if that is the case and you have reached the last position in your S matrix, then you can proceed for the traceback. If you have remained with populating the if you have remained with populating few boxes that are still empty in your S matrix, you would again set that matrix position by calculating the 4 value, find out which one is the maximum, and again do and repeat the same procedure till you populate all of the positions in your S matrix. So this is what is going to happen. Okay, so things would become more clear, the concept would be crystallized when we proceed further, and when I tell you how is that you calculate these values in your S matrix. Okay, so let us begin discussing the very first step, that is initialization. Okay, so the very first step that is present in our dynamic programming implementation for RNA secondary structure prediction is to initialize a S matrix. Okay, so this is what is happening now. Okay, now let us consider that we have got this sequence of which we need to figure out how it would fold upon itself to form a secondary structure. Okay, and in order to do that, we would require a matrix of size n by n. Okay, provided that there are n number of residues in your given sequence. Well, this would eventually mean that if your sequence contains 12 residues, then you would have to devise a 12 by 12 matrix and you need to solve it. Okay, so in our case, how many residues are here? There are 11 residues. Okay, and hence we need to have 11 by 11 matrix. Okay, I hope it is clear. Now we would call. Okay, so once you create this S matrix, okay, this particular diagonal, what we would call it as the main diagonal, this is the central diagonal. Okay, we would call this diagonal for the sake of simplicity as the main diagonal. Okay, now the values of these main diagonals are set to 0. Why do we do that? Because these value indicate base pairing with itself. Look, we have got the same sequence on that is written across, and that we have got the same sequence that is written on the left hand side. Okay, so whatever the boxes that are present on the main diagonal, well, these boxes represent the comparison of the residue from one from I mean that would correspond ki the C is being base paired with the same C. This box correspond to G base paired with itself. This box correspond to this A getting base paired with itself. Okay, so if this is the case, we don't have to include that in our calculation. Therefore, we have set the values of such boxes in your S matrix as 0. Okay, and what we do is that for its consequent diagonal, I mean I'm talking for this diagonal now, which is present just below the main diagonal, we also set the values to 0, like this. Okay, so you would learn in a while as to why do we do this. Okay, but for time being, when we say that when we have initialized our process, that would mean that we have set all the values in our main diagonal to 0. We have identified the consequent diagonal and we have set its value to 0 as well. Okay, so this is what we have done. Okay, this is our main diagonal. We have set the values to 0, and the subsequent diagonal on the other hand side of your matrix, we have identified that diagonal and we have set the values to the 0 that are indicated by blue color over here. Okay, now say that we would call this as row and indicate each and every position as J. Okay, and whatever we have written it on the left hand side, we would call it as column and indicate the position as I. Okay, one more thing that we need to do is that let us number the position in the sequences starting from 1. So this is the first residue in your RNA sequence would be termed as 1. The second residue would be termed as 2 till n. Okay, so we would say that your RNA has got k number of residue. Okay, sorry, it's not n, it's called as k. Okay, remember this is very important, that there are k number of residues in your RNA. We would come to this in a while. Okay, so this is what we have done. We have row, we have column, we have our RNA sequence that we have numbered 1, 2, 3, 4, and we would refer them to as K. And we have done the same thing on column. Okay, so now let us talk about how do we populate this S matrix now. We would call this as an S matrix. Okay, so now as whatever you see over here, Dij is equal to maximum of max I less than k less than j dik plus this particular expression. Well, this is a formal description of Nussinov-Jacobson algorithm, which has got 4 steps. Okay, so this expression of your Nussinov-Jacobson algorithm is termed as step 1. This much expression from your Nussinov-Jacobson algorithm is called as step 2, this would be called as step 3, and the remaining expression, this one, the bigger one, we would call it as step 4. So that is what we need to do for populating each and every position in your S matrix. We would have to take these 4 steps, and after taking this 4 step, we need to perform certain calculation that would enable us to populate these positions in your S matrix. Okay, so I will break down the details of this algorithm and what do these steps mean in our next slide. But over here, let us focus on this particular component of your step 1, this Wij. Okay, so this Wij is the weight value that is needed to be assigned when the base pairing occur in this way. Okay, so wherever this base pairing occurs, you need to perform these weight values, what we call it as Wij. Okay, so now these weight values are also these weight values are also sometimes referred to as the coupling energy factors between the bases. Okay, in simpler words, when your G base pairs with C, the coupling energy is assumed to be 3. When your A base pairs with U, the coupling energy is assumed to have the value of 2. When your G base pairs with U, then the coupling energy is assumed to be 1. Okay, so these values represent abstraction of energy release when such base pairing occurs in your RNA folding. Okay, so these numbers are actually rounded off to 3, 2 and 1 respectively. The actual values are near to this 3, 2 and 1. Okay, well, say for example, the coupling energy of this G with C, the actual value is about 2.9. Okay, so we have kind of rounded it off to 3, and same is the case with this 2 and 1. Okay, so we have done this to make calculation simpler, and therefore by rounding it off to the next biggest digit, the calculation would become more simpler. Your life would be more simpler. Okay, so let us talk about as to from where do we obtain this data. Okay, so the data from which these values of 3, 2 and 1 are extracted is very similar to the Turner's calculation for free energy estimation that we have learned earlier in our previous semester. Okay, well, let us not go there now. You can revise it from our previous lecture. So for time being, so far our RNA secondary structure prediction is concerned, for time being it will be enough for you to appreciate that if base pairing occurs, when you are solving this S matrix, well, you would have to add this weight value that correspond to free energy release during such base pairing. Okay, so this is a very significant significant, you can say, component of your dynamic programming algorithm. Okay, so now let us discuss as to what these 4 steps are. Okay, so well, now the value in we'll say for example, if you want to populate this particular box in your S matrix. Okay, so this particular box is your, this one is represented over here. Okay, and let us call this box as current box, and this current box is denoted by D I J. इसे क्या कहेंगे अपन? We would call it as D I J. Why? Because we have rows and columns. Okay. So the value that is needed to be populated in this current box, that is represented by this Dij, this is what we are talking about. Okay. So this Dij, the value of this box is dependent on the values that are present in its three adjoining position. Okay. This position, what we call it as the diagonal position, whatever value is present in the diagonal position would reflect what is going to be over here in your current box. Okay, we would call it as step 1. Okay, we have to read it as diagonal position, plus we would have to add the weight value. Okay, if this is Dij, then the previous would be Di plus 1. Okay, I correspond to column, we have increased in column, therefore I plus 1, and we went one row back, therefore j, the row component j would be decreased by 1. So this box correspond to Di plus 1, that is increment in column, and j minus 1, that is decrement in your row. Okay, so what we need to do is that if over here, if the base pairing occurs, then we would have to add this weight value that we have discussed in our previous slide. So this would be your step 1 of your dynamic programming algorithm. This one, step 1. Okay, so step 1 would be, in a simpler word, it would be just whatever the value is present in your previous diagonal box, you would have to add certain weight as provided as per this scoring if base pairing occurs at your Dij position, or if the base pairing occurs in your current box. Okay, the second step in your dynamic programming algorithm, that is we are talking about this Di plus j plus Di plus 1 and j. Okay, uh, this value Dij would be dependent on what value is present in the column position and what value is present in the row position, that is Dij minus 1. Okay, and the fourth value is dependent on the value of k. So what was k? Do you remember what was k? We have when we have set our dynamic programming S matrix, and when we have given these numbers, so we have given the numbers like this is first, this is second, this is third, this is fourth, and we have k number of residues in our S matrix. So the fourth value that is needed to be calculated is dependent on these numbers. Okay, well, let us talk about it now. Okay, okay, and this is the expression for which we need to calculate. Okay, now this is how you read the step 4. Okay, so you would read it as like, while the value of k falls between I and j, we need to add value at position dik and position dk plus 1 j. Okay, we need to find maximum of the added values, and that will be our step 4. So you don't have to worry if you don't understand this mathematical expression right now. It will clear out when we compute your S matrix. So I'm just telling as to how you should read this particular expression in your formal description of nussinov jacobson algorithm. Okay, so let us now see how do we calculate the step 3. Now we'll say it is now clear that whatever 4 steps that are present in your Nussinov-Jacobson algorithm, these 3 steps are quite simple. This is previous diagonal box plus you would have to add this weight value if there is a base pair. This one is the one from your diagonal, sorry, this one is the one from your column, okay, and the remaining one was from your row position. Okay, this one is your column and this one is your row. Now let us talk about this step 4, which is quite tricky to understand. Okay, so now how do we calculate the fourth value? Okay, so now, well, say for example, this is the position at which you want to calculate the fourth value. Okay, or this is the position that you need to fill up using your dynamic programming algorithm. Okay, so of course, as I have already told you, the value over here would be dependent on the neighboring boxes, the previous diagonal box plus weight value if there is any if there is base pairing at this position. Okay, the value from your column position and the value from your row position, these three values would be essentially required. Okay, now the fourth value would be dependent on what values are present over here, what k values are present over here, that would eventually decide your fourth value that you need to compare along with these three values. Okay, so we don't need this, it would create confusion. Okay, so this is how things are needed to be done. To calculate this fourth value, what you need to do is that you need to find out which is the maximum if we are talking about the position at this one, at the row at 10th position. Okay, what you need to do is that you need to add whatever is present at row 3, that is whatever number is present over here with whatever number is present at C fourth position, column fourth position over here. So this number will be added to this number. This number would be added to whatever is present over here. This number would be added to whatever number is present here. This number would be added to whatever number is present here. This number would be added to the number that is present here. And this number would be added to the number that is present over here. So we need to continue till we reach the adjacent number of our Dij, or till the adjacent column, or till the adjacent position in our Dij. And we need to add this, sorry, this with this, this with this with this position with this position, this position with this position, and this position with this position. And by the time you reach here, everything would have been already populated by a given way. Okay, so that is what is expressed over here. Okay, so R3 would be added to C4, R3 would be added to C4. Okay, so it would have some value. Then R4 would be added to C5, R4, the value over here would be added to C5, R5 would be added to C6, that is row, the position at the value at position R5 would be added to the value at position column 6. Okay, this value R6 would be added to row 6, the value at row 6 would be added to the value at column 7, R7 would be added to C8, and R8 would be added to C9. And we would stop over here. Why? Because we have reached to the adjacent values to our Dij. Okay, so this is how it is needed to be done. Okay, so I would just give you for a hypothetical example. It is not the same sequence that we are dealing with. If you want to find out what would be populated over here, then what we need to do is that we need to figure out that that the value in this column would be dependent on these three positions. Okay, the previous diagonal box, the the adjacent diagonal box which is present in its column, and the adjacent diagonal box which is present in its row. We would call it as step 1, step 2 and step 3. Okay, so now for our step 4, well, say for example we would add R3 to C4. So what is the value present at R3? What is the value present at R3? You have got 2 here. R3 would be added to C4. The value at C4 is 5. So R3 plus C4, we have got 7. Then we would move one step forward. What we have got? R4 plus C5. R4 we have got 2, and at position C5 you have got 5. Therefore we will add 2 plus 5. Again we would end up with 7. We would move one step ahead, that is R5 plus C6. That is what we are talking. R5 plus C6. We have got again 2 plus 5. 2 plus 5, we have got 7. And in this way we would go on adding till we reach to the box which is adjacent to your Dij position. Okay, so in this way, after doing all these additions, we would have to then decide which one is the maximum of the numbers that we have created. So which one is the maximum? 7 is the maximum. Therefore, the value of step 4 would be 7. Okay, so we know the value of S1 is 5. Okay, diagonal box is 5. The value of S2 is 5. The value of S3 is 5. And just we have calculated the value of S4 is 7. So now out of this 5, 5, 5, that is step 1, step 2, step 3 and step 4, we need to figure out which one is the maximum number. Okay, so that is what we need to do. We need to figure out what is the maximum of values S1, S2, S3 and S4. That number, my friends, would be the number that we need to populate in our current position. Okay, so now what is the maximum of 5, 5, 5? S1 is 5, S2 is 5, S3 is 5. S1, S2, S3, we have populated it as 5 and we have calculated the fourth step as 7. So what is the maximum number of these 4? This 7 is the maximum number. Therefore, we would place 7 over here. Okay, so this is how we do it. Okay, so the value of Dij is supposed to be 7. Okay, now the thing is that it is not like you can randomly select any column in your S matrix and start populating it. Okay, there is a specific path that is needed to be followed when it comes to populating your S matrix. Okay, and the path that you need to follow is that you would have to begin with the first column. Okay, the first column that is adjacent to your main diagonal. Okay, this column. Okay, and you would then proceed diagonally till you reach the end of your S matrix. Okay, that means you would populate this box first in your S matrix, then you would proceed towards this box, then you would proceed your this box, and in this way you would move diagonally to populate your first diagonal. Once you reach the end of the first diagonal, again you would start out at the start of your second diagonal, follow the same path, reach at the end of the S matrix, then move on to the next column and calculate all the values in the subsequent diagonal. In this way, you would move on diagonal by diagonal for calculating or populating your S matrix, or for populating with some values in your S matrix. So this is the path that is needed to be followed. Okay, so now let us begin populating our S matrix. Okay, so what is needed to be done? This is our main diagonal that I have corresponded with 1. Okay, so if this is the main diagonal, the value at second position would be our first diagonal. Okay, so we need to follow this path. One by one position are needed to be selected this way, and then we are supposed to be populating those. So this is the path that is needed to be followed. Okay, so well, the first diagonal that we need to populate over here is, you know, a special case. Okay, you really don't have to perform all these calculation to decide what is going to be in your first column in your first diagonal at least. Okay, so we have populated the previous diagonal. Now you know, now you might get an idea as to why we have populated here the zeros over here. Why? Because we know that the values at this position are dependent on the values of previous boxes as such. The one in column position, the one in row position, and one in previous diagonal position. Therefore, we have populated with the value of 0 so that it becomes efficient for proceeding further for your calculating the subsequent diagonal values. Okay, so now in the case of this first diagonal, that is a very easy step. Okay, so it is a very easy case. Okay, the value of step 2, 3 and the previous diagonal would be always be 0. Okay, the previous diagonal step would always be 0. The column position would always be 0 and the row position would always be 0. Okay, that is what I mean. The values of step 2, that is this step, values of step 3 and the values of this previous diagonal, this would remain always 0, 0 and 0. Okay, but there is possibility of base pairing at these positions, right? And therefore only the weight values will be carried forward wherever there is base pairing at this diagonal. Okay, therefore for this first diagonal, all values can be considered to have the score of 0 except the places where base pairing occurs. The weight values are to be inserted. Okay, it is quite simple. So well, we cannot calculate this step 4. Okay, for this first diagonal as well as the second diagonal, we cannot calculate the value for this step 4 because we still don't have the values that are populated in these two positions, dik and dk1 plus j. Okay, we don't have such values for this diagonal as well as this diagonal. Okay, therefore in case of first two diagonals, you don't have to calculate this step 4. In case of the very first diagonal, these three value would be always remain 0, as you can see over here. For each position, the three values would always remain 0. Okay, the only difference would be the weight value. So wherever you revisit this column or this column or this column, if there is base pairing as per this rule, then these values are supposed to be placed in these columns. Okay, so I would just fill it up. Okay, so as you can see over here, the value of step 1 would be 0 plus the weight value. Why we have added weight value? Because this box correspond base pairing of G with C. And what is the base pairing value of G with C? G with C, we have got 3. Therefore, we have placed 3 over here. Okay, over here we don't have any kind of base pairing. Over here we don't have any kind of base pairing as the weights that we have been provided. We reach over here. This box correspond to the base pairing of A with U. Now we have the weight value for A getting base paired with U, that is 2. Therefore, we would populate it with 2. Similarly, we have value of 1 over here and we have value of 3 over here. Okay, so in this way, populating the first column is always very easy. All you need to do is to figure out where is the base pairing, and as per these weight values are just needed to be carried forward. All the remaining values are supposed to be placed as 0. Why? Because you cannot calculate step 4 and the numbers to the adjacent column are always 0. That is the main reason why we have maximum number of zeros in first column, and only the weight values are carried forward. Okay, so now let us move on to the second diagonal. We have dealt with our first diagonal, and let us move on to our second diagonal. Now you should note that for calculating this particular position, all 3 values are available, right? S1, S2 and S3 are already available. So we don't need the value of previous diagonal now, and therefore we have kind of removed those values so that it won't create further confusion. Okay, so since the 3 values that are required for filling up the position over here, since all these 3 values are available, then we don't require the zeros at our previous diagonal box. Therefore, we have removed it. Okay, there were zeros, now there are. Okay, so now let us try to figure out as to what is to be populated over here. Okay, so let us place or set this as a current box. Okay, now what is present in its previous diagonal box? This value 0, the diagonal value would be 0. Now let us see if we can add the weight value. So this box correspond base pairing of A with C. So do we have any weight value when such base pairing occur, A with C? In our weight value, our A only base pairs with U. Therefore, the value of this weight would be 0. 0 plus 0, we would have 0 at our diagonal position. Right? Okay. The step 2, that is the column contribution, we have got 0. Step 3 would be our row contribution, that is 3. Okay, we cannot compute this fourth step. Why? Because we don't have anything prior to our this 0. We don't have anything, therefore these values are uh, not possible to be calculated. Okay, therefore we would consider it as 0. So next thing that we need to find out is that what is the maximum out of this step 1, step 2, step 3 and step 4. What is it? 3. We would put 3 over here, and in this way we have populated our uh, second diagonal's first position. Okay, so next what we need to do, we need to move diagonally down, right? So let me show you how do I calculate this position? Okay, so in order to calculate what dij we can say over here, what we need to do, find out which is the what is present in its diagonal over here. The diagonal value over here we have got 0. Then let us consider the possibility of adding weight. This box correspond to base pairing of C with G. Okay, we have got C with G. Here is C and here is G. What is the weight value? 3. Okay, so step 1 would be 3. Then what is its column contribution? 0. What is its row contribution? Again 0. We cannot do step 4, therefore we have got 0. What is the maximum of 3, 0, 0, 0? We have got 3, therefore 3 would be placed over here. Okay, well, now let us, what we need to do next now, we need to move diagonally down, that is over here. Okay, so this is our current box dij. In order to populate this, what we need to do, we need to find out what is present at its diagonal position. We have got 0. Then let us see if we can add a weight value. This box correspond to the base pairing of u and a. We have got anything from u and a? Yes, we have got value for base pairing of a and u, that is 2. We have got 2 over here. Okay, then we would have to consider step 2, that is diagonal. Step 3, that is row position. We have both 0. Okay, and step 4 we cannot calculate for time being, therefore it is 0. So which is the maximum of 2, 0, 0 and 0? We have got 2, therefore we would populate 2. In this way you would go on populating the remaining columns, the remaining boxes, this and this. Okay, and after populating, okay, you would get something like this. Okay, here is how you would end up populating your entire S, your second diagonal. Once you end up with your second diagonal, you would move on to the third diagonal, that is we would start it from over here now, and then move on like this. After reaching, we would start out with next diagonal, complete it, start out with next diagonal, and we would reach to the final position. Okay, so this is how you have populated the second diagonal. Okay, now let us see how do we populate the third diagonal and what are the changes that are that has happened over here now. Okay, so we'll say now this is our current box. Okay, this is our current box, and in order to populate this current box, what do we need? We need what is present in our previous diagonal box, this value. Okay, this value is 0. Then we have to consider what is the possibility of adding this weight value. This box correspond to base pairing of C with C. We don't have any weight for C with C, therefore we would keep the weight value 0. 0 plus 0, we will give it 0. Okay, now for this particular box we would have to consider this contribution, that is column contribution 3, row contribution, that is also 3. And over here, my friends, now it is possible to calculate step 4. Okay, so over here you have got, you need to add this 3. This is your dik position to this 0. This is your dk plus 1 j position. So you would be adding this 3 plus 0. 3 plus 0, that is 3. The first number over here is 3. Okay, so you would have 3 over here. Okay, so which one is the maximum out of these 4? 3. Therefore we would place 3 over here. Okay, now we don't need this. Okay, let us rub this after we have populated it. Okay, then we need to move diagonally down. Consider this as a current box. Okay, so what we do, we initiate with what is present in its diagonal position over here, 0, plus consider the possibility of adding weight, u getting base pair with g, u getting base pair with g, you have got 1. Okay, 0 plus 1, that would give you 1. Okay, what is its column contribution? 2. What is its row contribution? 3. How can we calculate step 4 for this particular column? We need to add this 0 with this 0. Okay, we need to add this 0 with this 0. Okay, 0 plus 0 is equal to 0. We have got 0 over here. Therefore, the final value of step 4 would be 0. Which is the maximum of this 0, 1, 2, 3? Of course, 3. Therefore, 3 would be populated over here. Now, you should always note that for calculating this step 4, we don't consider the values that are present on the main diagonal. We only play inside this main diagonal. We only play with numbers that are present on the other hand, on the other side of this previous of this main diagonal. Okay, just remember that this is going to be a very turning point in our subsequent discussion. Okay, now let us remove this. So what do we need to do next now? Next, we need to move diagonally down. Consider this as a current box. Okay, so what is the diagonally opposite present number? You have got 0. Then consider if you can add a weight value. Okay, this weight, we can see that this box correspond to base pairing of u with a. U with a, you have got the weight value of 2. Therefore, the value of step 1 would be 2. Right, we are considering this. We would have to also consider the column contribution. We have to also consider the row contribution, 2. Then we would have to calculate the value of step 4. For this, we have got 0 over here. This 0 is needed to be added to this 0. 0 plus 0 is 0. And since we have got a single number, the value of step 4 would be 0 over here. Right. So what is the maximum of these 4? Still 2. We would populate this with 2 over here. Right. So in this way, I have shown you how do we populate the first three values in our subsequent column. Okay, so in this way you can proceed further and calculate other values as well, like this. Okay, so once you reach over here, once you reach at this 4, then we would move on to our fourth column, or you can say our fourth diagonal, and then calculate whatever values that are present over here. Okay, let us see how things change when we reach to our fourth diagonal now. Okay, so now we are supposed to populate this particular box. Okay, and to populate this particular box, what do we need? We need to consider what is present in its previous diagonal box. We have got 3. Can we add the weight value over here? How do we do it? By considering the base pairing. This box correspond base pairing of u with c. Do we have anything? U pairs with G, U pairs with A, but U don't pairs with C. Therefore, we have got 0 over here. 3 plus 0, you have got 3. Okay. Then you have to consider this step 2, that is column contribution 3. Step 4, that is sorry, this is step 1, step 2. Step 3 is your row contribution 3. Okay, now we have got two numbers that can be used in calculation is step 4. Okay, so for step 4, your 3 is needed to be added with 2. 3 plus 2 is equal to 5. Then your 3 is needed to be added to 0. 3 plus 0 is equal to 3. So the first possibility is 5, second possibility is 3. Of these numbers, which one is the maximum? 5 is the maximum. So the value for step 4 is 5. Okay, now we need to find out which one is the maximum of these 4 numbers. Of course, 5, right? This one is the maximum. Therefore, we could place 5 in our current box. Okay. Okay. So what do we have to do next? We have to move diagonally down. Consider what is to be populated over here. For doing that, what do we need? The value at previous diagonal box. 2. Is there a possibility of adding a weight? This box correspond base pairing of U with G, right? U with G. Do you have anything U with G? Yes, you have G with U, that is 1. Okay, that will give out to be 3. Okay, column contribution 2, row contribution 3, right? And let us try to find out what we end up in step 4 now. For this calculation, you would have to add this 0 with this 0. 0 plus 0, 0. The first value would be 0. Then you would have to add this 2 plus, you would have to add this 3 with the subsequent 0. 3 with the subsequent 0. 3. The next value in step 4 would be 3. Which one is maximum of these two values? Still 3. Now what is the maximum of these 4 value? What is the maximum of these 4 steps? Still 3. Therefore we would add 3 in our S matrix like this. Okay. Okay, then again we would move diagonally down, and we need to populate this box now. For populating this box, what do we need? We need value at the previous diagonal box. It is 0 over here. Can we add the weight value? This box correspond to the base pairing of A with A. Do we have anything from A with A? No, because A pairs with only U. 0. 0 plus 0, 0. Now we need to check out what happens for step 2 and step 3. Step 2 is column contribution 2. Step 3 is row contribution 2. Let us calculate the values for the fourth step for this. Okay, what we need to do is to add this 0. We are not supposed to include the number from the main diagonal. Therefore, we would begin with 0, add this 0 with this 0 with 2. We have got 0 plus 2, that would be 2. First value for comparison in step 4 is 2. Then we have got this 2 that is needed to be added to this 2, 2 plus 2, that would give you 4. Second value is 4, and over here we reach the diagonal, therefore we would have to stop. So we have got two numbers for comparison in step 4, which is the maximum of these two numbers, 4. Therefore the value for step 4 would be 4. Now what is the maximum of these 4 steps? 4. Therefore we would place this 4 over here. Okay, so in this way you populate the entire fourth diagonal. Like this. Okay, so once you reach at the end of your S matrix, you would move on to your subsequent diagonal, that is your fifth diagonal. Well, now let us see what happens over here. For that is, whenever you move from subsequently whenever you move on the subsequent diagonal, the number of steps for step 4 calculation would eventually increase. Okay, why? Because the farther the uh, as the number of your diagonal increases, you would get farther from the main diagonal, and as you get farther from your main diagonals, the number for calculating the step 4, that is the number of k, would eventually increase in your algorithm. Okay, so let us see what can be populated over here. Okay, for populating this current box dij, what we need? The previous diagonal box. Value at the previous diagonal box is 3. Can we add a weight value over here? U getting base pair with C, C only base pair with G, therefore we would have 0 over here. 3 plus 0, that would give you 3. Okay, step 2 would be column contribution, 3. Step 3 would be the row contribution, 5. Now let us see if we get higher number in our step 4. Okay, for calculating the step 4, what we need to do is that we need to add this 3 with 2. 3 with 2 is 5. Then we have to add again 3 with 0. Next one is 3 with 0. Again 3 with 0. 3. Okay, and we have reached the main diagonal, so we need to stop. Okay, so we have got 3 values for over here for calculation, 5, 3 and 3 in this case. Which one is the maximum of these 3? 5. Therefore the value of step 4 would be 5. Now of these 4 steps, which one is the maximum? 5. Therefore we would populate 5 over here. Okay, then I would rub this. I would rub all of these calculation as well, so that it won't create confusion. Okay, now we need to move diagonally down. Consider what is needed to be populated over here. For this we would need the diagonal number 2. Is there possibility of adding a weight? This box correspond to the base pairing of A with G. A pairs with only U, therefore the weight value would be 0. 2 plus 0, we would have 2. Next thing that we have to consider is the column contribution, that is step 2. We have got 4. What is the row contribution? That is step 3. We have got 3. Well, now let us see in our step 4 calculation if we can exceed 4. Okay, so for step 4 calculation, what you need to do is you need to add, you would start it from over here, 0 plus 2, that is 2. then 3 plus 2, that would be 5, then again 3 plus 2, that would be 5. So how many values do we have over here for comparison? 3 values, 2, 5 and 5. Of these 3 values you would have to select the biggest one, 5. Of these 4 steps you would have to select the biggest one, that is of course 5. We would have to populate 5 over here, right? Okay, now next what is needed to be done? We need to move diagonally down. Well, let us rub these things so that we don't end up adding the wrong numbers. Okay, okay, here we go. Now we need to populate this one from our fifth diagonal. Okay, so what do we need? We need the previous diagonal box 2, right? Can we add the weight value? This box correspond to base pairing of G with A. G with A. Do you have anything for G only pairs with C and G only pairs with U? Therefore, the weight value would be 0. Therefore, 2 plus 0 would be 2. Then we also need to consider the column contribution, that is 5. Step 2, we need to consider the row contribution, that is step 3, and we need to calculate step 4. Now for this particular step we would have to add this 0 with 3. 0 with 3 would give you 3. Next value to consider would be 2 with 2, that would be 4. Subsequent value would be addition of 2 with 0, 2 with 0, that would be 2. So we have got 3 values over here, 3, 4 and 2. Which one is the maximum? Of course this 4 is the maximum. The value for step 4 would be 4. Now we need to figure out which one is the maximum of these 4 steps. Of course it is 5. Therefore we would populate this box with 5. Okay. So in this way you would go on proceeding diagonally and reach till the end. Okay, so in this way you would populate the remaining fifth column till you reach over here. Once you reach over here, again we would move on to our sixth diagonal, that is over here. Okay, now let us freshly start out with this and see what we can populate in our sixth diagonal now. Okay, I would populate initial few values for you and then you can populate the remaining one. Okay, so for populating this box in your S matrix, what do you require? You require the previous diagonal box. Value at the previous diagonal box is 3. Now can we add any weight value? Okay, for that we need to consider this box is base pairing of A with C. Do we have anything with A? A do not pair with C, therefore weight value would be 0, right? And 3 plus 0 would be 3. Okay, then we would have to consider the column contribution. We would have to consider the column contribution, that is 5, row contribution, that is 5. Now let us see in our fourth step if we can exceed the value of 5. Okay, now for over here we have the 4 values that would be considered for what would be the maximum value at step 4. What would be those 4 values? We would begin with adding 3 with 4, that is 7. Then we would be adding 3 with 2, 5. Then we would be adding 3 with 2, 3 with 2, again we have got 5. Then we have added 5 with 2, that is 7. So we have 4 values over here for comparison: 7, 5, 5, 7. What is the maximum of all these 4 values? 7. So the value for step 4 would be 7. Now we need to decide what is the maximum value from these 4 steps, that is 7. Therefore we would populate this box with the value of 7. Okay, let us rub the remaining things. Alright, then what do we need to do? We need to move diagonally down. Consider this as a current box, and for populating this box, what do we need? The value at the previous diagonal box, that is 4. Can we add a weight value? This box corresponds to the base pairing of G with G. In our weight table, we don't have any value corresponding of G with G. Therefore the weight value would be 0. 4 plus 0 would be 4. Now we need to consider what is its column contribution, 5. What is its row contribution? Again 5. Now let us see if the fourth step exceeds the maximum value of 5. Okay, so what do we need to do? We need to add this 0 with this 5. Then we need to add this 3 with this 3, that will give you 6. Then we need to add this 3 with 2, that will give you 5. Then we need to add this 3 with 0, that would be 3. So which one we have got in this way? 4 values to compare for step 4: 5, 6, 5 and 3. Which one is the maximum? 6. So in this way we have got these 4 values. Which one is the maximum of these 4 steps? 6. So we would place 6 over here. Alright. Therefore in this way you would go on populating the 6th diagonal. So after all calculation, your 6th diagonal might look like this. Okay, so what is the next step? We need to move on to our 7th diagonal. Okay, I would just let you know what happens in the 7th diagonal. Okay, so over here, what is the previous diagonal box? Value at previous diagonal box, 5. Okay, can we add a weight value over here? This box corresponds to the alignment of G with C. G with C, yes, we have got the weight value of 3. 5 plus 3, you would end up with 8. Okay, so we are done with the previous diagonal box. We need to consider the column contribution 6. We need to consider the row contribution 7. Now let us calculate the value for the fourth step. For that you need to add this 3 with 5. If we add 3 with 5, that will give you 8. You need to add another 3 with 5, 3 with 5, that is still 8. Then we have to add this 3 with 3, that will give you 6. Add 5 with next 2, that will give you 7. Add this 5 with 0, that will be 5. So how many numbers do we have in step 4 for comparison? 8, 8, 6, 7 and 5. Which is the biggest out of these 5 number? We have got 8. Therefore 8 is the final value for our step 4. So whatever values we have calculated for step 4, which one is the maximum? Of course 8. Therefore we will place 8 in our S matrix. Okay, next what we need to do? We need to go diagonally down. We need to go diagonally down, and let us see what we end up over here. For populating this box, we need the value from the previous diagonal box, that is 5. Can we add a weight value? This box correspond to base pairing of u with g, u with g. 5 plus 1, we have got 6 over here. Okay, so this is your previous, this is step 1 contribution. Okay, that is previous diagonal box plus weight value. We ended up with 6. Let us consider the column contribution 7. Let us consider the row contribution, that is 6. Now let us move on for calculating the values that are needed for step 4. For calculating the value for step 4, we need to add this 0 with 5, 0 with 5. What we have got? 0 with 5. What? 0 with 5. We have got 5. Then 3 with 3. 3 is added to 3, we will get 6. Then again 3 is added to 3. We have got again 6. 3 is added to 2. We have got 5. Then 5 is added to 1. We have got 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so we have got 5 numbers. 5, 6, 6, 5 and 6. Which one is the maximum of these 5 numbers? 6. Of the values that we obtained for 4 step, which is the maximum? 7. Therefore we would populate over here with 7. So in this way you proceed for calculating the values in the 7th diagonal. Okay, and you would end up with something like this. Okay, next is we move on to our next diagonal, that is the 8th diagonal. Now I will show you over here what happens in our 8th diagonal. We need to start out with this position. What is the previous diagonal value? 6. Of course. Can we add a weight value? This box correspond to the base pairing of u with c. C pairs with only G, therefore we have to add the weight value of 0, 6 plus 0, that would be 6. Okay, column contribution 7, row contribution 8. Now let us consider if we can exceed this 8 in our step 4. Okay, for calculating this, the very first number that we need to do is to add up this 3 with 7. 3 plus 7, that would be 7. 3 with 5, 3 with 5 would be, no, sorry, 7 plus 3, that would be 10. 3 plus 5 would be 8. And again 3 plus 3 would be 6. 5 plus 3, it would be 8. And again 5 plus 2, it would be 7. Then again 7 plus 1, we have got 8. So how many numbers we have got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That is, we have got maximum of 10, 8, 6, 8, then 7, and then 8. Which is the maximum? 10. Of the 4 step, which is the maximum? 10. Therefore we would populate 10 over here. So in this way you can proceed further and populate the entire 9th row. Okay, so similarly we populate the 9th row, 10 and 10. Okay, and I will perform the calculation for the last column in our S matrix, that is this column. Okay, so in order to compute what is to be populated over here, what do we need to do? We need to find out what is present in its previous diagonal box, 10. Can we add a weight value? This box corresponds base pairing of G with C. If G gets paired with C, you need to add the weight value of 3. 10 plus 3, that would be 13. Step 3 would be 10, column contribution. Row contribution would be 10. Now let us calculate the values that can be involved in our 4th step. For this you would need to add this 3 with 10, 3 with 10, that would be 13. Then 3 with 8, 8, 9, 10, 11, 11. 3 with 6, that would be 9. 3 added to 6 would be 9. Then 5 added to 6, that would be 11. Then again 5 added to 5, 5 added to 5, that would be 10. 7 added to 4, 7 added to 4, that would be 11. 8 added to 3, 8 plus 3, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 10 added to 3, we end up with 13. Now what is the maximum out of all these numbers that we have calculated for step 4? We have got 13. So the final value for step 4 would be 13. What is maximum of 4 steps? Of course 13. Therefore we end up with 13 as the final value in our S matrix. So in this way, my friends, you populate your S matrix, and whatever steps that we have followed for populating this S matrix corresponds to the steps that are proposed by our Nussinov and Jacobson. So you were following this Nussinov and Jacobson algorithm, the steps that are involved in Nussinov and Jacobson algorithm for populating this S matrix. Okay, So once you have populated this S matrix, now there is one more thing that you should know, that uh, you know uh, there are two versions of this Nussinov and Jacobson algorithm. So in the first version, as you might have noted, we don't include the values from the main diagonal in calculation of step 4. So this is the scheme that we were following till now. Well, later on, a few papers were published that demonstrated certain advantages of including the values from the main diagonals in the calculation as well. So this is the second version of the same algorithm, in which you would include the value of 0, I mean whatever the value that is present in your main diagonal. Okay, so here the number of values to compare in step 4 will eventually increase, and of course the final value for step 4 would also be different. Okay, so in our previous case, okay, we used to add this column, so this position with this position, okay, in version 1. But in this case we won't add this 2 with 5, but we would add this 0 with 5. So whatever you have ended up with 7 at the first position, you would end up with 5 at the same position if you follow this scheme. Okay, so the bottom line is that don't argue with someone if he or she comes up to include the values from the main diagonal in the calculation. Technically that is also correct, but only the final score would eventually differ. Okay, now you know that there are uh, two version of calculating the S matrix. Okay, so say by any of the method you end up with calculating the S matrix. So the final step now would be step 3, that is the traceback, or you can say back tracing your S matrix. So this traceback is done to find out what is the best possible folded structure. Okay, and the best folded structure in your S matrix is found by connecting numbers in your S matrix. Okay, so the maximum value at or near the last diagonal is connected to the next largest value, always moving down and to the left, that is moving diagonally down. And you need to proceed this way until you reach the initiation diagonal, or what we call it as the main diagonal. So if we follow the same rule, we would begin with the maximum values in our final column. Okay, that is 13. What was the next thing that we are supposed to do? We are supposed to connect the largest value, always moving down and left. That is, we need to move down and left, that is diagonally this way round. Okay, so what is the next biggest value? Yes, we have got 10. If we move diagonally down, what is the next biggest value? We have got 7. If we move diagonally down, what is the next biggest value? Is 5. Again, if we move diagonally down, what is the next biggest number? 2. And eventually we reach the main diagonal. So this is called as traceback. Now using these connected numbers, you can see how your sequence has folded. So what do these 13 correspond? These 13 correspond the base pairing of G with C. Therefore, we have this G base paired with C. Then we ended up adding number 10. This 10 corresponds subsequent base pairing of C with G. Therefore, C is base pair with G over here. Then we ended up adding 7 in our traceback. This 7 correspond base pairing of U with A, base pairing of U with A. Then we move on diagonally down, ended up at a value of 5 that correspond base pairing of G with C. Over here you have got G with C. Then you have added this 5 to this 2. These 2 correspond to the base pair of A with U, A with U, and eventually you ended up at this position, which correspond to the base pairing of U with U, that is we have got over here. In this way we end up finding the secondary structure. This one would be your stem and this one would be your loop. Okay, so this is how, using simple steps in Nussinov-Jacobson algorithm, it is possible for you, if you still have a page and a paper, or you can say a page and a pen, it is possible for you to figure out what might be the optimal optimal folding of your RNA structure. Okay, so this is the conclusion. We learn 2 methods for RNA secondary structure prediction, that is the dot plot method and base pair maximization method, which implemented dynamic programming. The dynamic programming approach involves 3 stages: initialization, creation and population of the S matrix, and then backtracing. Okay. One more thing that we have learned is that we need a specific path that is needed to be followed while filling up the S matrix. You cannot randomly populate your S matrix. And this Nussinov-Jacobson scheme is a 4-step method for computing the scores for any box that is needed to be populated in the S matrix. So these were the highlights of your Nussinov-Jacobson algorithm, and eventually my lecture with RNA secondary structure prediction. Okay, thank you guys for your kind attention, and I'm stopping my lecture.